Few thoughts today around the sermon title, Flock Management 101. Against the backdrop of those two passages, among others that one can find that deals with shepherds, since it's the second Sunday in Advent and the theme for the day, as you may have concluded after listening to the lighting of the Advent candle, that it's the theme of the shepherds today. Before I get into that part of the shepherds, and because it's central to, I think, all the Gospels and also the readings for today, the question, what is the kingdom of God? What is it? I would have loved for us to just stop the sermon here and let's sit down and have a good conversation about it. With a time limit, because once I think you get going, it can easily go to the 4 o'clock darkness at this time of the year. What is the kingdom of God? And the reason I ask it is, if we pay any attention to the Gospels and try to find what Jesus was about and what he was talking about, it was for 90% at least directly the kingdom of God. The kingdom of God is thus, and the kingdom of God is like this. And then he would tell parables and stories to illustrate that. And also illustrating that through his life, through what he did. He would tell the story, an oral presentation, and then he would live it, illustrate it through action as well. Kingdom of God, I think, not a domain or a region or a temporal thing that is confined to a specific era or that we enter to when we die, that exists somewhere out there in the vast universe where we cannot find it, where the Hubble telescope cannot peek into it. But the kingdom of God is when God's love brings God's realm, the situation and condition when God's love prevails, brings that into being. It is not confined to eternity, it is also part and can be part of life today, in the present. It is when God's love becomes visible through action, through words, through what people do. So the potential of God's kingdom is always present. It is always accessible. But it has to be actualized. It has to be brought into being. I don't want to belabor the point. But if you have a question about that, I would appreciate it if we can discuss it. Because it's, I think, critical for anybody that calls him or herself a Christian to understand that the gospel story is that good news about the kingdom of God that Jesus was so serious about. So on this Sunday, around the theme of the shepherds, looking towards Christmas, what has the kingdom of God to do with the birth of Jesus, and what has it to do with this passage about the shepherds announcing the birth and being the messengers, and then also the shepherds in this parable, the well-known parable of Jesus saying, you know, the one sheep that's lost is more important, and there is more joy and rejoicing about that than the 99 sheep that are fine. I chose the sermon title because when reading about these shepherds, it struck me that if I were their employer, if I was the owner of the flocks, I would have fired them. Because in these stories, they do not practice responsible management of the flock. Their job is to take care of the flock. So there they are out in the open. One sheep, like sheep do, because they're not the most intelligent creatures around. One sheep wanders off. What does the shepherd do? He leaves the 99, he goes after that one, and we don't have an indication of how long it took him to find that sheep. If it was in Africa, he would have probably never found the sheep again. It would have been lunch or dinner very quickly. Also in the illustration or the story that the gospel author tells, that important story that we enact so often around Christmas and that most of us know, about the shepherds out in the fields and the angels telling them, go and bring this good news. Go to Bethlehem. They leave their flocks. There they go in a hurry, the gospel says. And they spend time in Bethlehem with the flock out by themselves. Not what I would think is responsible risk analysis and, doing what you're supposed to do, following your job description, take care of the flock. Not saying, all right, I'm going to be a messenger, I'll just leave my sheep, hope they're okay, pray to God they're okay, as we say, and also just leaving the sheep, going after the one. Let's try and look at this a bit closer, perhaps, and trying to imagine what Jesus was trying to convey with the parable and what the gospel author was trying to convey as he understood, looking back at the work and life of Jesus, what was the important thing that he wanted to convey with that narrative, that story about the birth of Jesus and the shepherds. Looking at the parable first. A parable is an instrument, a style instrument that authors used to convey normally one major truth, one major point that they wanted to make, and they would take an everyday situation that people are familiar with, put that out there, and people will say, yeah, that's true. Life is like that. And then they would lead the audience into the story, confirming this is how life is, and then come with a surprising new perspective, a different way of looking at the reality that they have all accepted, yes, this is how life is. And we see this illustrated here. No shepherd would leave this flock, the 99 there, and go after the one that wandered off. That's not how life works. But for the purpose of this story, what Jesus was trying to illustrate was, and look what he says. He says there were tax collectors and sinners. This is what the author conveys, the author of Luke, with tax collectors and sinners that came to listen to him, that associated with him, and that even ate with him. Jesus broke bread with them, which was a horrible thing to do for a Jew. That wasn't done. And against that background, the author said, this is what the kingdom of God is like. A very upside down thing. Because that 99, the good ones that followed the rules, that weren't as stupid as the one that wandered off, the misfit, the one on the margins, the one that doesn't follow the rules, the one that is actually a danger to the flock and to what is good and acceptable, that one comes out as the most precious one. The one that is included and the one that is so important that there is joy about that one being found and not so much about the 99 that are the good ones. So the point here is not about the shepherd going after that one. The point here is that there is joy in God's kingdom when the love of God is found. Also, in the story about the angels and the shepherds, something very similar. A shepherd in those days were not regarded as the most trustworthy person, to put it mildly. There was a prophet or a proverb saying, "You are lying like a shepherd." Because you can see the shepherds out often in the field, sitting around the fire, perhaps roasting some of the flock, telling each other stories because they didn't have, cable TV or any other thing. Most of them couldn't read at all. So they were sitting there telling the stories. And I don't know whom of you have been exposed to cultures that do not place an emphasis on the written word, but where the oral word is the most important thing. When you retell the story, it gets added to and it changes. Gets added to and it changes. People that spend time having a beer with friends also encounter that. When you retell the story, and Krista and other wives of my friends from my dorm days at college, we had a reunion when we were still in South Africa, always that just around 10 of us. And they would all say they get so tired of the same stories. But on the other hand, the stories are never the same. They grow and they develop a life of their own as you retell them. Probably the same with these shepherds, retelling the stories. So the shepherds were people on the margins of society, not regarded as people of integrity. And here we have an interesting emphasis by this author of this gospel on that kind of a character, central in the story. Through their bodily presence in the story, he conveys the truth about the kingdom of God. That this kingdom is also, and especially the kingdom for the outcasts, for the marginalized, those that respectable society are a bit uncomfortable with for whatever reason, and they are pushed to the margins. They are brought to the center stage and say, God's love, God's kingdom, regard these as acceptable people. They are so acceptable, or to the extent acceptable, that they will convey the gospel news of the birth of Jesus. And off they went in the story to do that, leaving their flocks behind. This is the story of the joy of the kingdom of God, that it is a meritless kingdom. A kingdom of unconditional acceptance, where there are no tests to be written, no good qualifications to have, no standing in society. No, you qualify by being human. Just as you are, as that hymn says, you qualify to be part of the kingdom of God. And I think we are quite good at creating categories and reasons based on merit to push people to the side. We do it overtly and covertly as well. openly, for instance, with people who are incarcerated. You know who they are. They're in that big house. We put them aside. And once you are marked as having been in the big house in this society, it is extremely difficult, if not impossible, to be accepted back again. I think that is why many of them say, you know, I'll do something again to get back in there, no matter how harsh it is. At least there I am accepted as part of a society. We also do it with the poor. And especially those that are homeless for whatever reason. We try to make them invisible people. We do not want to see them because they make us uncomfortable. And most often we associate bad things with them. They must be terrible people. Look, how can you live like that, and how can you end up like that? There must be something wrong with you. We also do it covertly, more below the surface, where we categorize people and we move them to the lost sheep category. For instance, with racism, it's more covertly in American society. It's not as open as it was as in South Africa, where you had laws and you could say, okay, we organize this thing properly. Here are the laws and you follow the laws. No, as someone who's lived in both societies, I can look at America and say, Yanks are more clever. They don't do it overtly. It's more covertly now. And so forth and so forth. Let me stop with that part of the sermon, the examples. The interesting thing for me is this meritless, unconditional love of God. As long as we do not open ourselves to that, as long as we avoid the salvation that comes through that, we are the outsiders. We are the sinners. We are the ones that relegated us not to the margins of society, but we relegate ourselves to a position and a situation outside the kingdom of God. Because we do not allow the love of God to open us and enter us and transform us and make us into new people that understand what it means to be accepted, what it understands to be belonging, to belong, to be part of God's kingdom. So looking at the shepherds, looking at who they were in society, but more looking at the joy that comes for the outcast, for the marginalized, for those that are regarded as improper, not appropriate, unacceptable for whatever reason. Looking at ourselves as individuals, as families, as church. Looking towards Christmas. Let us allow ourselves that joy that comes with being open to God's love. And entering into that wonderful situation and condition where we can experience that love that is beyond understanding. Let us enter into that joy. And let us give that joy and bring that joy to people that do not know it yet. This small group of people are doing wonders in this world. bringing joy to people in so many ways. The gifts of love, the many meals served in so many places. Every shift worked at the fair so that we can raise the funds to give to people to try and improve their lives. I applaud you for that, and I want to say that is testimony to God's love being present and the kingdom being realized. But that is not sufficient for us, because in that way we are most often treating the symptoms of underlying ills. And in our society at this stage, I think it is fair to look again at how we implement and practice our economic models. The inequality and skewed distribution of wealth is similar to what it was before the Great Depression and in that era. We need to look at that as well, and the role that it plays in excluding people from living a respectful life and being contributors and productive people to society and flourishing. The kingdom of God, as Jesus said, is around you. The kingdom of God is in you. Acknowledge that. Be open to it. Accept that greatest gift and rejoice. Like this shepherd with his friends about the good news of the gospel. And let us think about the birth of him that epitomized that, as we said and we read, in that affirmation of inclusiveness. Living and demonstrating the love of God to the extent that we are still talking about it today, that Jesus is still a thing today. May we honor that as we walk towards Christmas and live in the joy of that good news, the gospel of Jesus Christ. Amen.